Okay, I think it's time to start now our seminar or webinar. I'm Anna Kolesnichenko and I represent FEPS. FEPS is the organizer of this event. The event is dedicated to the 2-year anniversary of the beginning of the war in Ukraine, or how we say, full invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And at this time, we thought the topic of economy is very topical. Я також скажу зараз пару слов українською, але в принципі потім
I'm going to give a couple of words in Ukrainian, but then I will switch back to moderating in English. So big welcome at our seminar that we have today. It is dedicated to the 2nd anniversary of the war against Ukraine, and it is dedicated to the topic of the economy at the time of war. A small house rule from the bat: those in need of interpretation, please find a button with a globe sign at the bottom of your screen and select either English for English speakers or Slovenian for those preferring Ukrainian. Please stay with the selected channel.
Speak English and don't understand Ukrainian, as there is interpretation. At the bottom of the Zoom window, you can see interpretation button. So you need to click on English, then you will hear translation for whatever is in Ukrainian. And now, without any further ado, I would like to give the floor to Laszlo Ander, who is the FEPS Secretary General, for some introductory remarks. Laszlo, please.
Thank you very much, Anna. Good afternoon, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of FEPS, the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, I would also like to welcome you. Indeed, as Anna said, this online event is to mark the 2nd anniversary of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Let's be honest, 2 years ago, this invasion, which was decided by Vladimir Putin, came as a shock to many of us in Europe. But I hope that in the last 2 years, what you saw was that in the socialist political family in Europe, the hearts and the minds were at the right place, and our political family has been doing its utmost to extend humanitarian, financial, but also military support to Ukraine, which has been defending itself against the Russian aggression. And sadly, this is not yet ended, right? This is a war which will take probably longer time than most people would have expected. But this is a heroic self-defense. And it also has changed European politics, but it also has global implications. I would like to tell you about a few actions and activities which FEPS has been conducting in the last 2 years in order to help our political group to understand this situation better, but also to provide a proper framing and analysis also for the future. Maybe the most important action which we took was to compile a volume of studies, more than 20 studies of different authors, including Ukrainians, about Europe and the war in Ukraine, from Russian aggression to a new Eastern policy. This is the book itself. We already had the opportunity to present it in various locations in Europe, from Vienna to Helsinki. And I'm glad to report to you that now we are also working on a Ukrainian translation, because hopefully this will be a valuable addition to those who want to preserve a body of literature, a set of analytical chapters, especially what concerns the European politics, but also some of the economic aspects. But 1 year ago, when we were marking the 1st anniversary of the Russian invasion, we also chose as a progressive person of the year a district mayor from Warsaw, who was in the front line of the humanitarian action, because Warsaw was the city which probably received most of the refugees coming in large numbers, especially at the early phase of the war. And indeed, this humanitarian effort was outstanding. And again, we have to see that this is an ongoing effort, and it should not be downscaled, and it should not be phased out. So it's very important also to mark these great achievements. But I would like to mention also a few upcoming activities and plans we are having for the coming period. Perhaps the most important event which I can talk about is an EU-Ukraine Progressive Forum in June 2024, which is a tentative date and title for the time being, but we are sincerely planning an annual gathering of progressive stakeholders who are interested in Ukraine's democratic future as part of the European family. And in the meantime, we are also building a Ukraine module in the online progressive open university, which is accessible for those who register for this type of online training. And we also have launched an analytical series, which is called Progressive Ukraine, to focus on questions like social security, which should be an integral element of Ukraine's recovery and post-war transformation, but also on youth engagement, which obviously is also going to be vital. We believe that in the spring period, 5-6 analytical pieces can be brought together and published in this series. So we are the ones who continue to pay attention, but also invest resources into researching, discussing the current war effort, and also think about the long term, because I think the direction of the long term is now consensual for many. Ukraine's future needs to be developed through an integration with the European Union. We're also going to organize a conference on EU enlargement in April, where the progressive vision for Ukraine's EU integration will be further discussed. So I very much hope that many of you will be either in person or online, that you have the opportunity to participate also in these future activities which are outlined, but there will be certainly others as well. Now, the second anniversary of the Russian invasion was also marked by FEBS by a dossier of articles to analyze the situation from different angles of the Progressive Post. The Progressive Post is also our main publication outlet online, but also in printed form, which now always devotes some articles to Ukraine and its people. Thematically speaking, of course, most people are interested in the military developments, which obviously is understood and understandable in the case of a war. Nevertheless, we know that there are many other angles. You can look at a war and its consequences, the humanitarian by definition, but also the economic one is very important. This time around, I'm glad my colleagues suggested to shift the focus on the economy. In the case of a war of attrition, I think it's clear that the economic aspects are important for the time when the war is taking place, but also the subsequent period when we will talk more and more about a genuine recovery and reconstruction. So with these words and underlining the importance of the proper organization of the economy for the short term when the war is still ongoing, but also for the longer term when a recovery and reconstruction will be possible. I welcome all the speakers, panelists, and also the audience to this online event. And I hand back the microphone to Anna Kolesnichenko to introduce the speakers and moderate the discussions.
Thank you, Laszlo, so much. I will introduce now our keynote speaker, who is Bogdan Danilishin. He is a former Minister of Economy of Ukraine, and currently he is the head of the department at Kyiv National Economic University. The presentation will be for about 20 minutes, and we will have panel discussion, and I will introduce panelists at that point, and which will be followed later by Q&A. So those who want to ask questions, be prepared for later. And now I give the floor to Bogdan Danilishin, please. We will show slides in English, but Bogdan will speak in Ukrainian.
Доброго дня, шановні пані і панове.
Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. At the beginning, I'd like to thank you for having me, inviting me to participate in this conference. The topic selected for today's discussion is about ways of strengthening the Ukrainian economy during the war of attrition, beyond the battlefield. But again, what the battlefield is all about. There can be different battlefields. Primarily, yes, it is about the front line, where our heroic fighters have been fighting for the freedom and independence of our nation. But then there is also economic battlefield, the battlefield of support, also international support of our country. So we are thinking of a common joint battlefield of fighting against Russian aggression that is a threat not just to Ukraine, but in my view also to the rest of the world. For 2 years, we've been seeing and witnessing and feeling this war of Russia against Ukraine, and it did show the courage of the Ukrainian nation, our people's readiness to fight for the freedom and independence of the country. At the same time, the 2 years have proven viability of the nation, its strive for recovery and reconstruction. Speaking frankly, the economy of Ukraine throughout the time has been developing as a small developing economy. It is a matter of huge discussion whether it was prepared for the war. Definitely, at the beginning of the war, Ukraine was not able to build a truly wartime economy because no one prepared for that. No one wanted it. I've prepared some presentations to show what kind of matters are at stakes in terms of the development of our country, challenges faced by our economy, and tasks that it is facing and will be facing in the future. If we think about the beginning of 2024, we can see some signs of recovery efforts. According to preliminary data from the Ministry of Economy, GDP growth has been estimated roughly at 3.5% versus the same period in 2023. But we have to go from the fact that in 2023, we had a GDP slump at the level of almost 29.4%. So speaking about economic parameters of our country, we are effectively speaking about the fact that by various estimates, which can be seen from the presentation, the real GDP growth will continue at the level of 3.5, maybe 4.5%. Also, the government has been able to tame the inflation from nearly 25 in 2023 to a much lesser indicator. According to the forecast, By 2025, it will stand at around 10%. We also forecast improvements of foreign trade balance and certain growth of exports, which will supersede the import figures. Definitely, it has been and will be owing to the efforts from the IMF well, definitely it won't compensate for the downturn that we had in 2022, because the budget deficit was at the range of 27% GDP without taking into account grants. The industrial output of our economy is shrinking from 75% to the pre-war level. Last year, we saw a shrink of employment, and nearly 15% of the population left the country since the start of the war. And quite a big number of people were mobilized to cater for the frontline needs. Total losses by different estimates stand at $500 billion US. And there are also differing accounts of the scope of damage inflicted on our country. All of the institutions have joined this recovery effort.
So what did Ukraine do in the first place to transfer for the recovery and to transfer to the war economy? We actually provided this more funding for law enforcement agencies and for other employment options. I will further analyze other slides, but what I want to tell you that in 2015, in 2021, the expenditure for defense purposes was 56% of the GDP, and of course now the level of this expenditure is going to increase. Also, we managed to attract an unprecedented amount of support from our partners, and I guess this is a very important support for our fight against the Russian Federation. And starting the full-scale invasion, our external partners provided 237.9 million, and over 150% of this amount of money was used for these war activities. A bit later and very slowly, we began to recover the war production in Ukraine, this defense production. According to the data of 2014, the capabilities of a defense production complex increased 6 times compared to 2023. But when we compare 2022, the companies of this defense industry, they increased their production 3 times. But even though we have managed to increase this production, the real needs are much higher. So at the background of this constant underfunding, this Russian aggression generated a lot of projects which is damaging enterprises and their production line. Also, loss of jobs due to forced immigration. Also, unpreparedness of these maintenance systems to support and to repair the equipment. Also, the switch from these Soviet weapons to the NATO standard weapons is also very stubborn. Moreover, the government makes all the efforts to support business. The government is giving some grants to small and medium businesses. Also, as part of the program 579, there were loans given for the amount of 64 million hryvnias. Also, the tax burden was decreased for most of the entrepreneurs during the first month of the world. Also, some preferential taxation was introduced, and also the import of critical products was decreased. All of this helps to support the business and also the community, and still to keep the balance of this defense production. Of course, we have a lot of problems that we need to work on and support. You should look at the slide 6 and 7, and over there you can see that the level of loans is decreasing. So the level of loans which is we are giving is 14.5 of GDP. And also you can see on the slide 7 that we have this a great deficit of external borrowings. The income that we have can also have only 53% of our expenditure. And this expenditure increased nearly 20 times compared to the pre-war year of 2021. So this is actually the proof that we have something to work on. In 2024, Ukraine needs to attract 2.2 trillion hryvnias, or nearly 28% of GDP. Most of this amount is going to be covered by some borrowings, including the domestic ones. Of course, Ukraine has other issues and problems that need to be solved. Unfortunately, during the 21 months of this full-scale war, the military industry did not become the main problem of the economic life of the country. All the other services like computer services are not there to support the defense problems of our army. And so we still have some production capacities that are not work for in full. In the budget, we have the money only for contracting of half of the products, which potentially our defense companies can produce. At the same time, the bank system has this huge free liquidity over 800 billion hryvnias. All this money is not involved in solving the main problems of the country, and we have something to work on, and that's the areas where the government and the National Bank of Ukraine should work. We analyze this military experience of Ukraine, and we analyze all the countries' experience. I mean, those countries which had a certain experience of this atrocious war. We are also analyzing those capabilities and opportunities that we have for the recovery of Ukraine after the war. And Ukraine is also doing its best to support, to protect its independence and to fight the enemy. And still, we need to use the resources that we have at the maximum level. I try to analyze what kind of internal domestic resources the state has and how they can be optimized for these defense needs and other needs of the country. Of course, we need to provide for this transfer to the war economy. So this is an optimal decision today, but this symbiosis should increase the role of the state in control of different sources and different resources. We said more than once that transferring the economy to the war else is one of the most important things right now. With some economical and managerial leverages should be used for that. I have introduced some ideas that are important for securing our victory in the short and medium term. So we need to increase this defense production 5 times, and also introduction of some government programs for the needs of the army of Ukraine. The defense industry should get some public orders for involving these defense capabilities, and the need for these activities is also the reason that some of the practices that we have right now, they are not really efficient. That is why the government should be responsible for that. We should invest more in the projectile production, also anti-tank and anti-ship weapons, also some drones like FPV drones. Also, we need more investment in this defense industry. We have analyzed a lot of historical aspects in this problem, like the federal government of the USA invested their physical assets in this weapon production companies, over 350 billion of American dollars. So most of the investments were there in the defense industry. As for the expenditure of 2023, 2024, this investment is only 3% of the GDP. So the beginning of the full-scale war against Ukraine showed that we have these gaps in the production of air defense weapons, and we are very grateful to our partners for providing these weapons for our army. We also need to develop certain maintenance facilities to repair the Western equipment and Western weapons, and we need to think about development or construction of some joint enterprises on the borders of Ukraine and its neighboring countries. Also, one of the areas that we find relevant is using government incentives to support producers of all the groups of products. large enterprises should be supported by the state. So the state must support the market economy, creating these opportunities for some defense production, but at the same time they use somehow restrain this mechanism. It is also important to attract some private investments to develop the defense complex of Ukraine and to have this joint production with NATO partners. This government needs to create some legal tools for the efficient work of state and private enterprises in the sphere of defense industry. Also, the government needs to provide support the development of innovative defense mechanism and instruments. I insist again on the necessity to open these joint defense enterprises with the support of our partners. And we should use all the available tools that our country currently has, and that will really be able to secure the victory of Ukraine in this large war. And the key task of the war economy that we are trying to develop and that we have to provide in the nearest future is the maximum modeling of all the services and all the tools that can be used to support our army. We don't only think about the current trends in Ukraine, but we also think how our country will develop after the victory in this great war. We are now thinking about this after-war recovery. Of course, that could be a topic for another discussion, but we see our victory and we think that Ukraine can increase its production potential of up to 8 to 10% of GDP. And of course, it will require a lot of investments and also this massive support on behalf of our allies and other countries who are in the coalition with Ukraine. I tried to give you short characteristic of the problems that we face, and I guess the time will show if our work on this defense was effective. But what we can see now, the Ukraine managed to debust the myth about the unbreakability of the second best army in the world. Ukraine managed to win back and liberate a large part of its territory. And I'm sure the time will come that we will be able to provide the sustainable peace, not only for our state, but for Europe in general. And Ukraine will be a partner of the European Union and also NATO. Дякую вам, пане Данилишин. Ви, можливо, помітили, що слайди не зовсім співпадали з тим, що говорив наш спікер.
Available on our website on the event page. It has lots of useful information about the economy and monetary sector in particular, so everyone can download this. But now we will come into our next part, which is a discussion. And for the first comments, I would like to invite Dmytro Andreevich Nataluha, who is the chairman of the Economic Affairs Committee at the Ukrainian Parliament. And basically, every speaker will have up to 5 minutes for comments. And maybe, Dmytro Andreevich, you can say something about the effectiveness of Ukrainian war economy and why the resources were not mobilized to the extent possible.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Mr. Danelishin, for such an impressive presentation and incredibly insightful and well prepared. I wish that members of the current Ukrainian government were able to present the topic in such a brilliant manner. Now, in terms of the war economy and why wasn't it mobilized, and in a way, why are we still struggling to put it on the wartime rails? One of the problems is that the feeling of the totality of the war is lost. It's lost not just inside Ukraine, it's lost outside of Ukraine. And for the first year and a half, we have been encouraged very much to keep our economy in a market form. I personally was arguing with a lot of foreign delegations that were coming to Kiev, saying, "Oh, guys, you're doing such a great job, keeping a great market economy. Well done. Keep it that way." And the argument was, I'm not sure that this is the right way, because Russia is doing precisely the opposite. They are scaling war economy. They are putting everything on the wartime rails. But in my opinion, basically, we didn't have the guts to risk to put everything on war rails, because that would mean curtailing a lot of market processes that were vital for our economy. And in the first place, the expectation to attract foreign direct investments and to start the reconstruction and the rebuilding even before the war ended, which required such market aspects as transparency, as predictability, as basically the ability to produce whatever you think is fit to, and so on and so forth. Because in market economy, usually businesses don't really have to choose. If we take the classic examples of the UK or the States during the Second World War, the government played a very active role in telling who should produce what, on which terms, in what quantity, and so on and so forth. So we are not doing that. We've chosen a different path. We're trying to wield this war with market economy in place. We have more and more discussions right now regarding the question of whether it is feasible. Can we keep up with the war effort by using just market economy, given the fact that Russia is literally mobilizing its gigantic state apparatus and basically transforming its economy to a more like Soviet-style wartime economy on the rails. And I'm not sure that we have a definite answer to that. Because a lot of reforms that we are being asked to implement in return to the loans and the credits from international financial institutions, those reforms have nothing to do with wartime economy. They are the reforms that are basically designed to strengthen competitiveness, to basically strengthen the market economies, to strengthen the aspects that have nothing to do, to be frank, with wartime. So this is one aspect of it. The second one is probably more of an attitude of the population inside Ukraine in the first place. And I think that this might have worked in the beginning, probably first 6 to 7 months, if we would tell everyone that, listen, okay, just as the UK did it in the 40s, Now the state will decide who will work on which plants, on which production lines, in which regions of the country where we need labor the most. Today, I don't think that is the case anymore. I'm not sure that would be possible to implement. So, in my opinion, it's more and more of a challenge to basically put Ukrainian economy on a 100% military rails. Not in the least because of our inner feeling and attitude towards this process. So, in my opinion, it might make more sense thinking about a different model, a different approach towards waging this war, an approach that will keep the market economy in place, will implement what is needed from the war type of economy, but would focus on the effectiveness of the processes. I think that in doing so, we have to keep in mind that even if by some lucky chance we would have to win this war tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, we will start a new war. Actually, we're already fighting it. It's the war against time. Because Ukraine would need all of its people to come back, and it will be very short in time to provide them with jobs, to provide them with housing, to provide them with some decent quality of life. And some people might stay in Ukraine for months, six months, a year, but in the end, everyone has to pay the bills. And people will be returning to those places where they will be able to have a decent job and a decent housing. That means that time would be of essence as a factor. And in my opinion, not just during peacetime, but we should consider this factor during wartime as well, and try to quicken all the aspects of the Ukrainian economy and to make them more prompt, to increase the velocity of the processes. This might be part of the answer of how to make the Ukrainian economy during wartime more efficient, increase the velocity of money inside the system, decrease the transactional costs inside the system, take away all the barriers, regulatory barriers, administrative barriers, monetary barriers, financial barriers, or tax barriers that impede the incentives and the speed of the processes inside the system during wartime. So, in my opinion, we would need not precisely a full-scale market economy and not precisely a full-scale war economy, but we would rather need something of a fast state, something that operates at an incredibly fast speed with a very, very impressive velocity that can compete in its efficiency with Russia's economy of scale. So whereas the Russians would be putting like literally millions of people in different industries, we need to invent an approach of how hundreds of people will do the same amount of job, if not more, in the same industry. And in my opinion, that should be the main challenge. We cannot win this war by just copycatting everything that Russia does simply because we don't have the same resource of human capital, the same resource of raw materials, and moreover, we are a democracy. We don't have the luxury not to care about whatever the people or the neighbors think that we are doing. So we have always this obligation to keep up with the public opinion, with a public attitude, and that, in my opinion, leads us to a position when we would need to reinvent ourselves, not just to win this war, but as I mentioned, to win the next war against time and to stay competitive during peacetime, regardless of the war factor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nataluha. So it looks like you argue for an agile war economy, something no one did before. So
One might say that, yes.
yeah, good. Now I would like to ask Dimitar Bogov from EBRD. He's the chief economist for lead economist for Eastern Europe and Caucasus for his comments. And actually, Dmitry Nataluha mentioned already that Western assistance has some conditions, if you want to comment on that, but also maybe on the role of EBRD in this current situation, because EBRD was quite active helping Ukraine. So maybe you can tell a bit on that, and also comments on the previous presentations. You're on mute, Dimitar, you're on mute.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for it. It shows me that I'm not, but
now it's fine.
Do you hear me? Do you hear?
Yeah, now it's fine.
Yes, thanks a lot, Anna. Great thanks to Professor Danilishin for excellent presentation, which really sheds light on all aspects of Ukrainian economy in the last 2 years. Let me start with commenting some aspects of the presentation. First, it's clear that at the beginning of the Russian war on Ukraine, Ukraine economy was left on its own in the first few months, and there we saw actually monetary financing and all negative consequences that it brought in terms of creating many imbalances in the economy. However, since mid of 22, we already have seen international support flowing into Ukraine, and for 1.5 years, it was quite strong in both budget support, but also in military support. And it seems that actually that support somehow created situation in which Ukrainian government did not pay maybe so much attention on moving economy to the war foot, as Dmitry was explaining very well, something that might be useful, but certainly did not come at that time. There was reliance on this external support, which was there and which was quite handy at that time, because it helped to restore the macroeconomic stability and actually eased the pressure on budget and external gap. However, we are already seeing some change in this respect, and actually the latest delay of external financing points to the need that maybe Ukraine needs to also try to rely more on its own forces, and this means actually what Dmitry was talking about, having more role of government into mobilizing domestic potential in terms of human potential, productive potential, financial potential, in order to put in force and start satisfying at least some of the needs for this war on domestic sources. Of course, we have to be aware that Ukraine does not have unlimited financial potential, and their dependence on external support will remain. However, there could be put some efforts to reduce the gaps in the budget, the gaps in the external in the balance of payment, and this would actually help to mobilize domestic resources. But foreign support will remain important and will be there for foreseeable time. We heard pledges from international partners of Ukraine, Of course, there are some hiccups here. We are seeing some delay here at the moment, but fortunately, already next month, Ukraine will receive significant external financing. And coming to the issue of EBRD is there from the first day. Actually, in the last 2 years, EBRD extended and mobilized around 4 billion euros of financing for Ukrainian economy. We're focused in several areas: vital infrastructure, energy resilience, food security, trade. We finance continuation of external trade of Ukraine with appropriate trade finance lines, and also financing of private sector. And just for comparison, before the war, EBRD was financing extending about 1 billion euros per year. Now in 2 years we extended 4 billion, and this amount will remain, and it might even grow further, because just last year our shareholders agreed to increase EBRD capital by 4 billion euros, which would enable continuation of support of Ukraine, but also of other countries of operation of EBRD, many of whom are somehow negatively affected by this war. So let me stop here, and later we can go deeper into some of these issues.
Thank you, Dimitar, so much. And also just transfer through you our gratitude to BRD, to your management, for all the work you do for Ukraine in this situation. So now we will go to our next panelist, but before, I just want to make a note that anyone who wants to pose a question, you can write this in the Q&A, or after this first round of comments, we will have open discussion, and then you will also have a chance to raise your hand and be promoted to a speaker mode, so you will be able to ask the question yourself. So you choose which way you want. Now basically we go further with our panel. I don't see Vitaly Lomakovich. Vitaly, if you joined and I somehow didn't see you, please raise your hand. And otherwise, we go to Luke Cooper, who is research fellow in international relations at the London School of Economics and Political Science, and is a director of Peace Reps Ukraine program. Luke is very active commenter on Ukraine. He writes articles, and he has a special program about Ukraine, so he's quite knowledgeable. And so I would like to ask you, Luke, to maybe tell something in addition to your comments on what you've heard so far. You might also maybe comment on the war economy in general, like you are in Britain, so you might want to comment on that, on the British experience. Also, as you observe it, like from outside, what happens in Ukraine, do you see any difference, like what was the war economy at the beginning? Has anything changed now? Like, because I think in one of your recent articles, you said that there are some changes. So please.
Hi, thank you so much, Anna, and thank you to the rest of the panel. It's really fascinating to hear your contributions, and I really come to events like this to learn rather than to educate. So thank you to my two previous panel colleagues. I think in terms of the first question around World War II and the theme that has already been discussed in today's conversation, the use of planning mechanisms by the Allies during the Second World War, we have to be a little cautious here, because Britain and the United States were, after all, both in different ways enormous empires. If you follow work by the economic historian David Edgerton, for example, he likes to point out that it's quite plausible that the British Empire, as we should probably refer to it, and the Soviet Union combined could have won the Second World War against Nazi Germany without the entry of the United States into the war, and Britain in particular was benefiting from enormous fiscal transfers from the empire. In one very famous example, it received $1 billion gift, not in today's prices, $1 billion from Canada at the time, injected straight into its war economy, and it was outproducing Nazi Germany from about 1940 onwards. So one needs to be cautious here, because Ukraine is obviously fighting this war against a foe that's much, much more powerful in terms of its economic resources, human resources, and military capacity, and is doing an extraordinary job in resisting this imperial invasion. And I think 2 years into this war, it's very important for people like me, outsiders, to recognize that. I can also understand why, after you've had the Yanukovych era, there's caution when it comes to introducing the kind of price control mechanisms that the United States and Britain used during the Second World War. After all, this was a vehicle for Yanukovych's corruption in those famous energy price market corruption cases. But I do strongly agree with the emphasis of Dmytro Nataluka, who, in his argument that there's some kind of middle ground that's possible here. I can't imagine a situation in the short term where it would either be practical or desirable for Ukraine to introduce a full command economy. I would also be, maybe this is where the Second World War example is relevant here. A command economy is not automatically Soviet. I mean, it's very natural for Eastern Europeans to think of command planning in terms of it's either Soviet or it's not planning. I mean, in Britain and the United States, private property was perfectly protected during the Second World War. There was no threat, tangible threat, to private property. And indeed, the management committee control boards that regulated prices in the United States and the UK were drawn from the business community, which underlines in a setting like Ukraine that there would be an inherent corruption risk, an inherent rentier risk. So I think in terms of the evolution of the Ukrainian policy debate, and again, I'm just here really as an outsider and an observer of it over the last a couple of years ago, it does seem to me that there have been some quite significant progress recently over the last 6 to 9 months in terms of how Ukraine is thinking about its war economy. There seems to be a growing recognition that the state will have to intervene very aggressively to support the private sector. Just yesterday, the president's office announced a 1.2 billion program of subsidies and state aid for the private sector. I agree strongly with Dmytro. This creates very interesting tensions with the European Union accession process, which basically assumes that Ukraine should be a normal market economy. And indeed, while Ukraine could activate in both European law and World Trade Organization law a national security exception to pursue the kind of preferential policies that are being proposed, if it was challenged in European court or at a WTO tribunal. The European membership process isn't a legal one, it's a political one. It's basically the European Commission saying, are you a regular, normal, vibrant market economy, and is your procurement competitive? So I think there's a huge question now with yesterday's announcement for Brussels and for the European Commission to say, well, hang on a minute, we really need to rethink and recalibrate politically what we mean by the membership accession process to take account of Ukraine's very unique circumstance. And the other thing I'll just finish on emphasizing, I mean, the extraordinary amounts that the Ukrainian government is proposing to put into the defense and military industrial complex next year, I think $48 billion in total. I mean, and 30% of GDP. I mean, that's your clearest and biggest illustration that Ukraine has, despite ironically having a government where the president describes himself as an economic libertarian, that even for the first year of fighting this war, there was this crazy idea that corporation tax, VAT, and income tax would all be slashed to 10%. Completely mad. Of course, at the same time, now reality has dawned on the government over the last 6 to 9 months, and there's a big move away from those policies. I think the finance ministry and the economics team need to be given a lot of credit on carrying through that shift. And I think it's particularly, so basically, if you put 30% of your GDP into defense and military industrial complex, of course you're going to push in the direction of a conventional state-dominated war economy. You're kind of locked into, if you like, that kind of trajectory. And reflecting the need to raise those kinds of resources, the Ministry of Finance has announced this new national revenue strategy to 2030, which not only drops all of the libertarian taxation policies that were previously proposed, but actually makes some quite significant criticisms of their operation, like the entrepreneurs' tax that basically, as they say in the report, mandated money laundering and smuggling in counterfeit goods because of the lack of checks. So really exactly what Ukraine didn't need, given the kind of challenges it was facing in peacetime, let alone in a war scenario. Very sensible proposals on reforming tax administration, a return to progressivity in income taxes, doing away with the entrepreneur tax, and a very sensible proposal to introduce a windfall tax. So this is how one would expect a state fighting a war to behave. But of course, as other colleagues have argued and emphasized, this is quite a big leap away from neoliberal or free market war fighting towards something that hopefully in 2024 can bear fruit for Ukraine's military campaign of resilience and resistance.
Thank you so much, Luke. So now we will go to our next and last panelist, Yulia Yurchenko. Yulia is a senior lecturer in political economy in the Center of Political Economy, Governance and Financial Accountability at the University of Greenwich in the United Kingdom. Yulia is more an expert on social things or social aspects of economy, and I think this will be her comments. And indeed, as also Dmitro Nataluha mentioned, and this the war of tomorrow, once the hostility stops, is about rebuilding the society and the economy. So Yulia, please, your comments.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be a part of this panel, and it's always a bit of a blessing to go last because you can kind of speak to what was said already. I want to echo a number of comments that were made about the kind of economic model needed for Ukraine as being something that sits between states and markets, because they kind of all have they both have their own limitations, of course, but as we know from history and from current experience as well, during the wartime, states need to take a much more spearheading role in the economies, not least because it's not very easy for markets, nonetheless. So I want to speak to a number of things that that have been mentioned, but perhaps not as directly as I feel that they need to be mentioned more directly. And that is, of course, that is the role of labor and growth in rebuilding of the economy during the war, and hopefully soon after the war. The state needs to be taking a more active role, and I agree that it needs to be more agile, and it needs to be kind of building bridges between private and non-private actors. But and coordinating must happen, including further investment in military industrial complex and procurement. That state can serve as a leader in investment and coordination between private and state actors. and it should be built on the model of polycentricity. We have seen how key informal networks and international networks have been for sustaining the war effort, including in diaspora and between displaced and refugees. And that, of course, and the big network of NGOs that have emerged, especially since the first invasion. But there is also an additional thing that the state could be doing, that it should be doing more. And I appreciate that it is not very easy during the wartime, not least because of the shortage of financing. And that is paying a stronger attention to public services and key foundational industries that should be spearheaded, owned and financed and procured by the state to better coordinate and prompt their deployment in their space and capacity and volume. That is also something that does not go against EU regulations. European Commission is neutral on ownership of public services and foundational industries, so that shouldn't be a problem at all in the long run either. Moreover, those kind of services are absolutely fundamental for supporting the war effort and resilience of Ukrainian population on the front line and behind the front lines. But also it is cheaper if those services are run by the state, because profit is not inbuilt and you can coordinate their deployment better. But how then do we get private and public investment into these different sectors, from the military to public services, and square the states and markets in the war economy? What I think is very important is to approach a number of these matters through wage-led growth and public spending that can actually pay for itself if it is done right. Because, of course, financing is a big problem. Of course, it would be great to increase public spending on absolutely every single thing, but where do you get the money? There are studies that show that actually public spending, fiscal activism, it pays for itself if money doesn't leak, doesn't get out of the economy in offshore zones or through tax evasion or anything of the kind. That is the kind of money that ends up staying in the local economy. It really it supports the local ecosystem of small and medium enterprises. And through wage-led growth, you also have taxation growth. The country becomes less debt dependent and less donor money dependent. This Made in Ukraine initiative that Luke mentioned is really great. I was really pleased to see that. And I think we need to have more of that, not least because the poverty rate in the country is through the floor. Just before the war, the full-scale war started, in 2021, poverty was at 5.5%, and it grew to around 24% in 22 alone, to include additional 7.1 million people. This is not a consumer that can generate local growth in the country. So, and then in the following year, of course, those rates have grown even more. There are two components that I want to stress towards the end of my intervention, and that is that we need to have the matters of labor and wages. There are already calculations that have been made that for the recovery, for the post-war rebuilding plans, there will be 4.5 million workforce shortages. And of course, it was already referred to by Professor Danilyshin at the beginning. But this is not just a problem that will happen after the war. There are already serious labor shortages across different sectors. There is big mismatch between availability of workers, their skills, matching of jobs and skilled workers, reskilling, upskilling needs, and of course, the challenges of displacement of workers and productive immobilization of women by constantly increasing care responsibilities. Through socializing care responsibilities and putting professionals on wages, we can free the productive potential of women through providing them with upskilling and reskilling opportunities. We can boost the productive capacity of the country. So two key components that I want to kind of come out of my intervention is that we need to be focusing on the production of demand and consumer in domestically and production of the worker in the country, and also attracting those who left. We have seen that, of course, because of the shrinkages of expansion of the demands, financial demands, of financing demands in the country, and shrinking of the GDP. Of course, there is we see defunding of a lot of social securities in public sector. That is something that discourages people from coming back to the country. Lack of job opportunities, low wages, shrinkage to healthcare funding in the coming year, future prospects, shrinkage to education funding, all of that, again, compromises Ukraine's ability to rebuild. If we look at if we deploy the approach of fiscal activism, that is funding, expanding public spending that pays for itself within the same fiscal year, and pushing towards increase of wages, especially in whichever industries is possible. I understand that it is not going to be too easy, too fast to do, but we can really boost economic growth, and we can create conditions that will attract people from abroad. I'm talking through this project I'm doing for FAPS as well about alternatives for the rebuilding for Ukraine after the war and during the war, with different trade unions organizations. I'm just going to mention one that an intervention that I had with the nuclear industry trade unions. They were saying that out of the 11,000 workers, 2/3 are out of work right now, and many of their trained personnel have left the country. If they do not come back, it will be very difficult for the country to rebuild. And I think through coordinating the market efforts, through coordinating the state intervention in public spending, through getting on board EU reforms and also social securities and working time directives, social security model, there can be very favorable conditions created for rebuilding of the worker of Ukraine, and through that rebuilding of the economy. And then private sector and investors will see growth. They will start matching the public spending and coordination, and the chances of a recovery will be stronger. I'm going to stop at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Yulia, so much for this very important message. Okay, at this, we now switch to our Q&A part. We have 15 minutes left for our event, so I would ask everyone to be brief. So one option is to ask questions in the Q&A chat, like Q&A part, but also you can raise hands and ask them yourself. And so actually, I think I've seen that Yaroslav Sidorovich wanted to ask a question. So, Pane Yaroslava, you can take the floor, but please.
Вітаю всіх, дякую організаторам.
Hello, everyone. I'm very grateful to the organizer, and I'm very grateful to Mr. Bogdan Danilyshin for his presentation, this numerical presentation of our economy. I am very grateful to Mr. Nathan Lucha and to the representatives of the Economic Bank of Reconstruction and Development. I would like to highlight some things which maybe strengthen or maybe and put some emphasis on what we discuss. So I'm a mathematician, and I always talk about these figures, you know. Do we need this second front? Yes, we do need. If we think about the Second World War, we should remember that this second front really expedited the victory. But what kind of front do we need? That could be an economic front. Of course, we understand that the armies of NATO countries cannot participate in this war because it will turn this war into the Third World War. But it's very good that we are discussing the economic topic today. But if we talk about the war economy, a lot of countries moved into this war economy mode. It was the USA and also Germany. What do I mean by this? They increased the production of weapons. And the weapons which are given by our partners, this can replace some new weapons. If you talk about this transfer to the wartime economy, if you talk about the First World War, about the Second World War, we need to produce these defense weapons. In Ural region, they were producing tanks. And if Ukraine transfers to this wartime economy, what will it produce? I know and I know it. I have a lot of friends, and they used to produce some medicine, some drugs, but they are now developing drones. So what does Ukraine need to develop to fight Russia? To be able to to fight Russia, we need some nuclear weapons. Can Ukraine produce some nuclear weapons? Yes, of course we can do. And if you could count the amount of air raid alerts, could you think of a production that has to stop when we have an air raid alert? And it means that we need to have these underground production facilities. But Russians do have some satellites, and they can see some changes. And in some extent, this openness, because this is the fight with the corruption. And it's very good that they showed some procurement, not only of these weapons, but some products actually were struck as a result of this openness. But we need to be symmetrical in our activities. We need to start this weapon race, the one that we had after the Second World War. So we need some asymmetrical activities, which is confiscation of Russian assets, and we shouldn't be afraid of that.
We don't understand this war is actually aimed at complete destruction of the Ukrainian nation, but it does have economic background. And as of today, only 7 Russian billionaires ceased to be Russian nationals. And most of them are still in the Forbes list and continue earning. And they get 20% reach every year of this war. According to World Bank estimates, 106 billion have been added by Russia. Not speaking about the amounts they've got from the Crimean annexation, from Luhansk, Donetsk Oblast. Like last week, we had a discussion about scores of facilities being in ownership of Russians in Karlovy Vary, same about Bulgaria. And yeah, 2 banks were confiscated, but generally Europe is timid about it. And Russia effectively invited European countries to this war. If you do remember 2014, when Crimean annexation took place, just next year, the Nord Stream 2 project was signed into operation. And yeah, it was not just Ukraine transporting the gas, but also other pipelines were in place. So yeah, some thorough economic efforts have to be paid to make Russia really. Could you please? Yeah. Yeah, they had 2.8% growth last year, according to IMF. So nothing to be afraid here. Now the European Parliament website cites all the legal considerations of it, and the lawyers increasingly say it is doable, it may be done. But still, there are those who are fearful of economic consequences.
Ще бачила пан Ярослав Жалілов.
Thank you so much. I also saw Yaroslav Jalila, obviously willing to say something, please.
Thank you very much for this very interesting discussion and presentations. I'm Yaroslav Jalila. I am representing the National Institute for Strategic Studies from Kiev. I think that just a few reflections about these presentations. The first one is that really it's the existential war for not only for Ukraine, but it's the war where the civilized world, which is based on open market democratic societies and economies, should show its better positions, strengths, and compared to the administrative, obsolete and oriented on the rule of force countries headed now by Russia. Of course, now one of main ideas, one of main tasks is now for Ukraine to keep economy in a market form and to show the strengths of this decentralized model. The problem is that democracy and market are not so strong and facing the administrative economies in mobilization, but they are much stronger and have much more opportunities in consolidation. So in openness, in integrating the forces, in integrating the efforts to withstand this aggression and to just to show the better position of this new model. So the conclusion should be that Ukraine should stay in this market democratic mode. And Ukraine, in this case, Ukraine will stay as the part of the civilized world, and of course can support the aid oriented to continue being in this as the part of civilized world. If not, if we want to change our model, for example, to some administrative one, we can continue receiving the international aid, but as a subject, as an arm against Putin. So the conclusion is that now a number of our foreign partners, European partners, also they try to come back to the pre-war policies that Ukraine can receive some money, some aid in exchange for reforms. So money in exchange of reforms. I believe that now we should just change this formula and speak about money in order for reforms. So money which are directed in strengthening the market and democratic economy in Ukraine. So maybe our international partners and those who are now representing the interests of Ukraine in different institutions, the participants in this panel, maybe can promote this change of agenda of Ukrainian Ukrainian advocates, Ukrainian partners, that just to start helping Ukraine, changing the traditional instruments, changing the providing the reforms which will strengthen the market regions of the national economy. The first part, and the second part, how to help to adopt these market institutions to the new challenges of war. So it's absolutely new challenge for everybody, for Ukraine, for Europe, for United States, for international institutions like IMF and World Bank and so on. But we should find how the market, open market democratic economy can adapt to the challenges of war. Just one example, which has been demonstrated by Professor Danilishin, is about the banking regulations in Ukraine. So due to the obsolete banking regulations, due to the so-called business as usual of National Bank as a regulator, now we have absolutely excessive liquidity of commercial banks. Well, when the international aid to Ukraine is just freezed inside the banking system. It doesn't move the economy. So maybe one of the directions of this aid should be to find the ways how to change the situation, how to force this money to work. It's just maybe some remark. And the idea is that we have to change the approaches. We have to change the understanding how the market economy should act facing the challenges of the protracted war. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jalilo. I've seen one more question from Volodymyr Rabushlik, but I don't see him anymore. So in this case, if we don't see any other questions, and actually we don't have so much time, I would suggest that now we do like some final comments. I don't know if everyone wants to make comment, but I wanted to maybe invite Professor Bogdan Danilishin to make a short comment, and then maybe a couple of more other comments. Maybe from Dmitro Nataluha if you want, but whoever wants to make a comment, please raise your hand, like electronically, and so we will do quickly.
Дякую ще раз організаторам нашої.
I'd like to thank again coordinators of this conference, of this discussion. It's really the problem of great importance for Ukraine, how to somehow merge administrative leverage with market stimuli for the sake of further development of our country. Well, such a combination would definitely make an optimal solution to ensure defensive capacities of the country and also ensuring further development of it. Still, a fundamental problem of our economic development is about low level of investments. And the question is how to boost investment attractiveness of our economy. This is the key task for the government, and I also think for our international partners helping Ukraine these days, and actually helping it also after the war. The victory that we all strive for, the victory of the Ukrainian people in the war, well, we have to understand that we will still have Russia as our neighbor, and it will still remain a huge swath of territory located nearby. And even in peaceful conditions, we will have to be always prepared to Russia keeping to its imperialist narrative, and we'll have to be ready. Because of that, a strong Ukraine is definitely a guarantor against any further encroachments of Russia, against Russia's attempts to affect the whole civilized world. If Ukraine perishes, Europe will not be spared. Russia will go further, restoring the Warsaw Pact and spreading its imperialist thinking to other countries. We need unity like never before. We need coalition to boost economic, political, military aspect of it. We need to defeat Russia and ensure a lasting and sustainable peace we all need now.
Thank you, Pane Bogdan. Now I see raised hands from Luke Cooper and Dimitar Bogov. Dmitro Nataluha said that he needs to leave, unfortunately. So, Dmitro, thank you so much for your contribution today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, dear friends, for this tremendous event. Thank you, and hope to see you soon. Thank you.
So, Luke, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I wanted to just briefly, as a closing remark, connect what Bogdan is saying around increasing investment with what Yulia was saying around the importance of growing the economy from the middle, if you like, or from the working classes. And so I think this is in a way that the critical question. So to loop back to the Second World War, in your classic war economy, states basically do what they don't do in peacetime, which is to repress consumption in order to actively drive as much investment as possible into production. And that's basically, to some degree, certainly what the British did in the Second World War. The United States was in a different position because it just wasn't anything like as affected, and working class and middle incomes in the United States actually rose significantly during the Second World War. But this is the critical question, and therefore, how do we activate that, if you like, or how does one go forward in that context? And I think the problem that Ukraine has is broadly that incomes in the population are so low that it struggles to say, well, how can you repress consumption in order to drive more resources into production and investment? You can't really operate a typical war economy in that regard. So, Yulia mentioned the poverty statistics. I mean, as my colleague Barry Hebb, the developmental economist, likes to point out, these statistics are based on enterprises with 10 or more workers, and they therefore exclude a lot of the rural economy and the informal economy in Ukraine. And if we take data from the World Food Programme, then poverty or around subsistence or below level in Ukraine might be something at the level of 75% of individuals who are only just getting enough income to get by. And then in that context also, in 2021 household consumption was 70% of GDP, so there was already kind of a product and investment kind of crisis in the Ukrainian economy prior to the full-scale invasion. And that leads, I think, to the conclusion, and this isn't easy to do in the short term, that there's only really two options here for Ukraine in terms of economic self-sufficiency. One is to really focus on areas where there are big opportunities to make advances in the short term in terms of labor productivity growth, and the other is value added. So can there be more investment in manufacturing, refinement and processing that allows Ukraine to turn more of its raw materials like grain, for instance, into cereals and then sell them at higher prices on the international market? But those, I'm afraid, are not easy to do in the short term. And what I'm going to be saying to international donors in 2024 is basically, well, look, there's no short-term scenario for Ukraine's economic self-sufficiency. There's only medium-term developmental assistance. And that makes it absolutely imperative that financial aid and as well as military aid and direct financial aid continues to flow into the Ukrainian economy, and that's going to be expensive.
Thank you. Luke, I saw Yulia also. Yulia, you still want to say something?
Yeah, just kind of to conclude and to also add to what Luke was mentioning. There is another vulnerability I wanted to mention that is very important for us to recognize in the Ukrainian economic makeup, and that is the role of donations and remittances in supporting the war effort, but also the economy even before the full-scale war started. In the year before the war, Ukraine was the largest recipient of remittances in Europe, Central Asia, with record inflow of US dollars of $18.2 billion US dollars. There's about half of current budget deficit. That is a lot of money. There was already a drop. In the first year of the war, there was a 10% drop in the remittances inflow for complex reasons that I don't have the time to go into now. A lot of the kind of humanitarian and otherwise war effort is also supported by donations that are also patchy now. And those flows will only be shrinking. Therefore, it is so important to actually grow economy domestically. And I agree as well with what other speakers said. There isn't a quick fix, and it's going to be difficult, but it is through fiscal activism domestically, through military industrial complex procurement, but also through programs like social housing that is non-existent in Ukraine right now, and investment in care economy that is low carbon, that needs to be happening. You put people on the wage, they're paying taxes, they're spending money. It's your basic multiplier, very basic stuff that also that recovers the local economy. IMF themselves, by their own reports, admit that fiscal shrinkage is uneconomical. Therefore, it leads to economic shrinkage further. I think if through this kind of boost of public spending and supporting socio-economic system of different services that support small and medium enterprises and large enterprises, Other sectors can be boosted. It can really be boosted. And a lot of also productive time that people would spend in these days is spent on fundraising and doing work that their time and skills could be used much better. I think it's also quite inefficient to not coordinate this effort of productive potential and money spent. So that's that for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilya. Very strong points you made. And I think the last one will be Dimitar Bogov. Dimitar, please. Your last comments.
Thank you. Let me close with a few remarks. First, Ukraine needs to preserve macroeconomic stability of the banking sector. These were issues that were crucial at the beginning. It succeeded in an extremely difficult situation to maintain this stability, and this is certainly a value that could only help. Certainly, there's a role for higher involvement of government, and we should not be afraid, especially in the war situation. But government role should be more in organizing and coordinating of military production, but also some other necessary productive activities. And here only the government has the power to organize, to put into force all productive capacities of the country. So the issue of investment is something that we should have in mind. It's objective one. In war, certainly there are factors affecting supply and demand for loans and for investment activity. Certainly, productive companies are not so interested to invest when the demand is declining. On the other hand, banks are quite cautious in such situations to invest their liquid assets, which are at the end deposits of Ukrainian citizens, and they don't need to be put into a danger. But certainly there are possibilities to reduce these risks, and with appropriate insurance schemes, certainly this could be driven down to some acceptable level for the banks. So it should be a combination of all factors, not to endanger those benefits that we already have, macro financial stability, but certainly more military production, more reliance on domestic sources is something that is needed. And we already hear actually some calls for that. International support will remain, will be there, but more and more Ukrainian needs to look for domestic sources. And when we talk about it, we have to bear in mind the huge deficit in the fiscal area and external deficit in the balance of payment. Fiscal deficit reached 25% of GDP. Something similar is trade deficit of goods and services. Certainly, some measures are needed in order to try to reduce these deficits, because without reducing these deficits, Ukraine will remain highly dependent on external support. And with uncertainty of the external support, certainly, even with international support, reducing these deficits would release some space for more domestic stimulus of the economy.
Thank you, Dimitar. I think there are some other questions, but I'm afraid we cannot do the more questions at this point because we're already over time. But whatever is left, please write in chat, or you can also write to us directly. And because our program, our project on Ukraine is continuing, so we will have publications, events, and so this will become, these questions can become the questions for further discussion. I would like to thank every one of you who joined today for this discussion, especially the panelists, our presenter Bogdan Danilishin, and I would like to wish that our discussion contributed somehow to better understanding and maybe ideas what can Ukraine do with its war economy. The recording of this seminar will be placed online. It will be available on Zoom. So in case some friends of yours couldn't visit, couldn't attend, so you can forward also the presentation of Bogdan Danilishin, which is more like on a bit of a different topic, more on monetary policy, but with very good slides and information will be also available on the event page. So on the same page where you registered, so you can check this out. It's already there actually. So you can use this for your analysis or something else. So so this is it today. Thank you very much, and we're happy to cooperate with you further on this important topic.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Дякую всім.
Дякую.
Дякую.